what I've noticed is if you have your goalie pulled for a long period of time, you actually, the skills of your players start to decrease more and more and more the longer you have your goalie pulled. So, if I have the goalie pulled for like half the period, I start to notice that my guys get drilled. They start to slow down. Their shots are terrible. It's almost like it starts to penalize you the longer you have your goalie pulled, at least on the Super Nintendo side. It loads the attribute and then it does some randomization. And sometimes, like at least on the Super Nintendo side, the degree that you can get boosted up is huge.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome once again to another NHL 94 podcast. I'm your host, Len the Legend, and today I am joined by a relative newcomer to the community, just like myself, and he's made quite a splash, hopefully just like myself too, or maybe I'm pumping myself up too high. But the gentleman is Mick Marcus. How are you, buddy?
Doing well. How you doing, man?
Living the dream, as always. And you know what? It's always a good time to talk about NHL 94 with somebody who is enthusiastic with the game, and along with a few other things as well. And it's also a really good thing that I took a break from playing. I got absolutely demolished a few moments ago. So it's good I take a step back and just talk about it rather than continue playing and getting wrecked along the process. But yeah, Mick Marcus, I'm going to give you the chance to introduce yourself, just like everybody else. I'm curious, like your background in terms of how it is you came across NHL 94. Everybody's story is a little bit different, but I love hearing their story. So I want to hear yours, like how you started your 94 journey and how you came to today.
That's a good one. So I guess like a lot of people, I had friends and neighbors across the street that had a Genesis. So it all started with the original NHL Hockey 92. I used to play in the friend's basement. Loved that game. Then eventually got a Super Nintendo. So my first constantly playing NHL was NHL PA 93 for the Super Nintendo, which a lot of people bash just because the frame rate is, pretty bad. So after that, I think we were waiting because we were in high school at that point. So we were really excited for NHL 94 to come out. And are you in Canada?
Yeah, just outside of Toronto to give.
Okay, I'm the same. Yeah, Mississauga, Brampton area, GTA. So it came out a little later on the Super Nintendo, I think towards the end of September, beginning of October. But when we first got that, it was amazing. I think at my parents' place, we had a huge speaker system set up, 2 huge speakers and some subwoofers. So the first time we played that, we blasted it on the stereo system. And we had body checks, so the goalie's making pad saves. All the sound effects and stuff were just amazing. So I think, and then the last part of that was the local mall here in the city had an NHL 94 tournament for Sega Genesis. So that was the first time I'd ever seen a video game tournament run. And it was for NHL 94. So we would go and we would rent the Sega Genesis because it was going to be for Sega. And we would play that every night until the tournament came. So that's sort of how I guess I got introduced into 94.
Please tell me you guys won the tournament.
I didn't because I like I said, I mainly played SNES, but I made it to the semifinals. And it's a shame too because that tournament too, the winner, it was run by a video game store. And there was tons of entries, and the winner won. I think it was a Sega Saturn at the time. Oh. So I was 1 game away from winning a Sega Saturn.
That's interesting. So is that video game store still in existence?
Funny enough, in that mall, it is. That mall is still around. It's like an old mall from maybe the late 70s. So it's sort of like one of those discount malls now. But that game store is still surviving in there.
That's funny after all these years.
Maybe
we could twist our arm to run another tournament and offer another Sega Saturn as a prize. Let's see what else they could offer. Yeah. Now, when you first started playing, I want to go back to the days when you were playing NHL PA 93 on the Super Nintendo. Now, you mentioned you were playing 92 NHL hockey on the Genesis before that. So when you started playing NHL PA 93 on the Super Nintendo, did you notice like immediately that there was a
Yeah.
frame rate issue? Like even at your young self, you could tell there was something just not quite fluid with the.
I think at that age, I don't know how smart we were about frame rates and stuff like that, but you could tell everything was like cornered. So in NHLPA, when you turn left, it was almost like a straight turn left. You turn right, a straight turn right. Where on Genesis, everything was smooth and fluid, right? So that's the kind of stuff we noticed. Like slap shots were pretty, rigid, stuff like that. But when you're playing it at that age, when it's all you have, you don't pay too much attention to it. It's not like we were like, we can't play this, it's horrible. When it's all you have, you just play it and you get used to it, right?
No, I can recognize that because I remember growing up when we got a game, we played it regardless if it was good, bad, or anything else in between. It was the game we played because it's really all we had until we could trade it with a friend for something else, or later on even trade it to a video game store. But that was much, much later on, right? For us, when we got a game, we just kept it for so long. So now I got the story of how you got started playing 94. But there's a gap here between then and now, especially now that you're involved in the online community. So maybe you could help color in what I'm missing here, because I'd love to know your journey from that particular moment after playing that NHL 94 tournament at the local mall to where you are right now. Yeah.
I wouldn't consider myself new. Like maybe I'm new in regards to recently getting involved in the forums and the ROM hacking and all that kind of stuff. But I signed up originally. I think I'm one of the originals, like 2006. I think if you go onto the forum, you can see some of my first posts for like all the way back in 2006. So what actually happened there was I was doing web design back in the early 2000s, and we loved NHL 94. We still played it. So I was going to create a website. I was going to create an NHL 94 website. Oh. And when I started searching for it, I found what was now, I guess, what was just NHL94, right? .com. And then I eventually saw that there was the NHL94online.com portion of it where you could sign up for a league, right? You signed up for like, I think it was like AOL Instant Messenger. And then you could chat with all the other people, sign up for a league and start to play. So that's how I originally actually got involved all the way back in, I guess it was 2006. But then I had huge gaps in between, right? Like life got busy. I started family early. So I probably jumped back in again, maybe 2015, 2016, and took a break for a couple of years. So I would go to King of 94, then I'd play some online again. But then when COVID hit, like a lot of other people, I pretty much been standard throughout since, I guess, COVID.
So when you were thinking about creating that website, NHL 94, and of course it was already done for us, you said you were playing with your friends. Like, give me the story behind it. Were you guys having like mini tournaments? I mean, what's the setup? Like, how did you guys play it? I mean, I always love hearing these stories.
Yeah, no, that's a good question, because I do have some good stories there. So we were in high school at the time. So we would always there was one friend, we would go into the basement and we would always play tournaments like every weekend, right? Sometimes there's 4 of us, sometimes there's 8 of us. And we do what a lot of the other guys do. We just have pieces of paper, keeping track, bracket. And then during the week and stuff like that, we just have season mode, right? So we play an 82-game season and we keep track of, we'd each pick a team and we keep track of our stats as we went along. And really, I guess that's the majority of how we played NHL 94. Now, I had a lot of different jobs. So I also worked at a grocery store, and there was a couple of guys at the grocery store that played NHL 94. And again, I guess this is mainly like an Ontario, Canada thing. Everybody was Super Nintendo, right? So most of the people I talked to at the time, it was the Super Nintendo version of NHL 94. So even in the grocery store, sometimes people would bring a CRT in the night shift or something, and we'd hook up NHL 94 and we'd play on our breaks, and for money, food, doesn't matter.
That's awesome. But you know what's actually funny with your story? Because you're right. Statistically, I believe there's more SNES players here in Canada than there are Genesis players. But myself, when I was growing up, I only played 94 on the Genesis. I never saw the 94 in the SNES because myself, my friends, everybody in our close circle had it on a Genesis. It was very odd that like our small circle was the total opposite versus what's going on in reality in the greater part of Canada. So I mean, I just wanted to put some context here. It's just I don't know. I never played the SNES 94 till actually really recently, and it was actually pretty interesting to play it.
It's almost like pockets, eh? Like, because at high school we used to have, when we would play it, there were other groups of people that had Genesis, and even back then, you know, it was always Super Nintendo versus Genesis.
Yeah.
So they would bash the Super Nintendo version. I think a lot of people like the sports games on the Genesis more than they did the Super Nintendo. So I know a lot of the people I hung around with were into sports. So a lot of them, it was a mix, half and half. You know, some of them had Genesis, some of them had Super Nintendo. But in my neighborhood, the guys I played with, it was all Super Nintendo pretty much.
Yeah, and that's the flavor we always had was Genesis. At least the appearance had it was better for sports games, and SNES was way better for RPGs if that was your jam. And there was a lot of good ones for. And I love both systems. I'm not going to say one I like better than the other, but each of them had their pros and cons, and it was good to have, you know, get exposure to both of them. And behind you, I see now. I just want to go into the weeds here. I see a Street Fighter arcade behind you. I'm not sure which version that is. Is it Hyper Edition? I have no clue. Talk about it, because I know you're big into fixing up arcade machines, and I like Street Fighter. I play, and in fact, I watch videos of competitions all the time. So I want to hear a little bit about that cabinet behind you.
Yeah, that cabinet's Street Fighter 2 Championship Edition. So the original Street Fighter 2.
It was the first one that came out after Street Fighter 2 World Warrior.
Yeah, I believe I thought World Warrior came out after. So Street Fighter 2 Championship Edition was first, and then I thought World Warrior came out. I don't know. I'd have to double check that background, but that's how I.
No, I'm pretty sure the original Street Fighter, because it's all we were able to play, and then all of a sudden we saw Championship Edition appear like a year later. It's like, holy cow! You can play as Vega, you can play as Bison, you can play as Balrog. It's like, wow, and you know, I don't know, it was so much fun. But is that a machine that you fixed up? Did you buy it in working condition?
This one, it was working, but I did have to fix it up. So during COVID, I started seeing these videos. Have you heard of those arcade 1-up? Those like quarters so small. So that started becoming popular. And what I ended up doing was I would buy them on auction, right? So there's an auction place here in Ontario. And what would happen is you could get a lot of like 6, 7, or 8 of them, but they would be missing parts. So because things were boring during COVID, I would get them. I would find the missing parts, I would fix them, and then I would sell them, right? And the ones that I liked, I would keep. And it was just a way to, keep busy and make a bit of money on the side. But then I started getting addicted to, I started watching other videos about arcades, and I saw this come up on Facebook. So this guy wanted to start doing making his own beer. So he started selling stuff in his apartment, and he had this Street Fighter. And it was from a pizza shop that was downstairs in the basement of the apartment that he lived. And so it had stayed in his apartment for like 15 years. He's like, I had enough of this. I want to raise some money to start brewing beer, different types of beers. So I bought it. First one, $400. Got the van, went, picked it up, threw it in the back of the van, brought it home. And the monitor was like all discolored. So I had to start learning like how to fix CRTs, cap kits, other people in the community who fix arcade games and how to do it. So everything else worked. It really just needed a monitor recap and fix that. That was about it.
How do you discharge the CRTs? I want to hear the proper way to do it.
So I was watching that video you did with Dangler, and where you gave a bit of a warning there about, there's like a huge, you have the potential to fry yourself, even kill yourself if you hit that anode cap at the top of the CRT monitor, right? I have a tool, a homemade tool.
It's like a stick. It's like a very long.
I just get a screwdriver, and you hook up like some wire to it to discharge it onto the frame of whatever you want to discharge to.
So you got like an alligator clip you clip
exactly,
onto.
Yeah, and it's duct taped to a hockey stick, so I can just
do it from far away.
Yeah, exactly. Get the screwdriver under the anode cap, and you see the spark, and that's it. It discharges to the frame. Right now, some of those old ones you have to be careful with. Some of the newer CRTs, they automatically discharge, like they have these like slow discharge capacitors in them. So as soon as you shut them off, it's already discharging, so you can't hurt yourself. So maybe some of the CRTs Dangler had, you really didn't have to worry about that. But the arcade monitors from the 80s and 90s, you really got to be careful with those.
Do you got a particular arcade cabinet you like to work on best? Is like the Donkey Kongs? Is it the Pac-Mans? Is it the Street Fighters? Like which ones do you prefer to work on? Or
I was always a sports guy, but growing up in the 80s, so I do like some of the old ones, like Miss Pac-Man, Galaga, Arachnoid, Donkey Kong. But for the 90s, I loved like the Open Ice 2-on-2.
Yes.
NBA Jam Tournament Edition.
Yes.
Obviously the Street Fighter Championship Edition. There was a racing game I used to love called Super Sprint or Championship Sprint.
Loved it with the steering wheel.
Yeah, three
players.
Yeah. So that's sort of what I started collecting. So in my basement or the main floor, I have like an NBA Jam cabinet that I converted. I put a computer inside, so it still has a real arcade monitor in it, but it's hooked up to a computer. And so I have like NBA Jam with the Jordan ROMs on it. So Michael Jordan's in that game. And then plus any of the other games, you can install like thousands of games on there, right? I just install the ones I like Open Ice 2-on-2, NBA Jam, Ghosts and Goblins. Oh man, there's a bunch of games on there that I like.
So the Open Ice, I remember we played that at lunch during high school. And I remember you could play like even with Gordie Howe if you punched in his initials in a birth. And the one thing that stuck out to us, and maybe we were all just, too young, we didn't realize it, but for whatever reason, Guy Hebert was like ungodly in that game. He was like a Vezina winner, and whoever picked Anaheim, whoever went up against Anaheim, Guy Hebert was just a wall. For whatever reason, am I dreaming? Is he like...
No, he was like on steroids, stacking the pads.
Okay.
Yeah.
Why? Guy Hebert of all players.
No idea. We got to check that source code to see what they did. I'm sure they did some type of...
Yes, and you're the man to do that. I definitely wanted to check that. But NBA Jam, you mentioned you got the ROMs with Jordan you put on it. Jordan never gave his permission. Is that why he was never included?
Yeah. He, I guess he had some special agreement where he had his own. I guess the NBA didn't own the rights to his face. He owned all that kind of stuff. So for whatever reason, he didn't want to give the licensing to the company at the time. So, but there are a bunch of videos you can actually watch online where he and Shaquille O'Neal, they made a bunch of cabinets just for them. So that's why they actually had versions where Jordan was in the game, and Jordan actually had the arcade cabinets in his house. With him in it. Yeah.
So they should actually give a Shaq Fu versus Jordan Fu or something and just create that and send it to their homes as well. Thanks a lot, guys, for not including your likeness in the original NBA Jam. Anyway, behind you, to your right, behind you, I see a joystick. And it's several. Is that like from like a D&D game? Is it because it's a 4-player?
That's a Simpsons. That's a Simpsons.
Oh, I love the Simpsons.
But that's one of those arcade 1-ups, those mini ones.
Okay.
So I still have parts and stuff that I sell for people. So that one I picked up the other week. It came with the board, so the Simpsons game plus bowling. I guess there was like a Simpsons arcade game, 4-player arcade game, and then there's also a Simpsons bowling game. So there's the trackball. I don't know if I can point.
Yeah, I see it in the middle.
Trackball in the middle is for bowling, and then the other 4 joysticks are for the 4-player Simpsons arcade.
So which is the best combination in the Simpsons? When you stand together for like 2 or 3 seconds and they just form like one super boss type thing. I think it's like Lisa sits on Homer's shoulders and she uses the.
You got good memory. I don't know. I was never I didn't play The Simpsons a lot. So I'm not even
we
sure.
Did.
Yeah,
that was such a good game. That and the Turtles game was
Turtles
great
TMNT. Yeah.
Dungeons and Dragons was another great one for the arcade. Like it was a quarter eater, and WrestleFest was another one you just played like crazy.
I have that. So I collect a bunch of arcade. They're called PCBs, but arcade boards. They look like humongous cartridges, right? So WrestleMania, WrestleFest, WWF WrestleFest. I got that. I got some Miss Pac-Mans downstairs. Over the course, I guess 3 years, I probably have accumulated 10 or 15 different like arcade boards, right? I'll fix them up and sell them, or some of them I'll keep. It's a good little hobby on the side.
Did you follow the whole Billy Mitchell saga?
I watched the Netflix documentary, but I'm not huge on top of that.
Is that the King of Kong?
Yeah, King of Kong.
King of Kong.
Yeah.
So now apparently Mikey was on the show many months ago.
Yeah,
now it was. I'm not. It's funny that the King of 94, the name is a derivative of King of Kong. Love it. Do you do even like computers? Like do you do the retro writing of computers and stuff like that? Like I'm looking at like 8-Bit Guy. I'm not sure if you ever followed him on YouTube, but
yeah, I've watched some of his videos. Yeah.
Do you do some of that stuff too?
The old like Commodore 64 type of stuff.
To me, that's new.
I used to have like old computers, like TRS-80 color computers, Commodore 64. I don't do any of that stuff now, but I used to have those growing up. That was my first computer, actually, Color Computer 3, TRS-80.
So let's dive into some NHL 94 now, because we went in the weeds quite a bit there. So I wanted to scratch that itch for me, especially after looking at that Street Fighter behind you. I want to come to your place and bring some quarters. I want to know, because you're diving deep into the code of NHL 94. And from what I gather, it's the code strictly for the Super Nintendo. You're not looking much at all at the Genesis. Is that correct?
Yeah. So the background is there was an individual in the forums, I think her name is Claire, Hayden Kale maybe is the what she goes by in Discord. She had created this utility for the Super Nintendo that allowed you to change the last names of players to be as long as you wanted. And also, so you could change the profile pictures of the faces, right? So I think a few people have maybe mentioned on the Super Nintendo side, everything is like encrypted, like all the graphics, they're compressed. So it's not like the Genesis side where you can sort of look at it directly in the ROM. You would need to know the compression algorithm to sort of decompress the graphics and see what they look like. And she actually went through, it looks like months and months of work, figuring out at least sort of how the decompression works. So she could change the profile pics and put new pictures, like change the code, go into a new area, put unencrypted or uncompressed images back in the ROM, and then show those on the screen. So when I saw her work, I started getting interested. There's another guy in the forum, Smaz, that's what I call him anyways. He's done a lot of work on the Genesis side, and he was like, oh, it'd be great if we could go through and we could start documenting the Genesis ROM. And I'm like, well, I think you can do that on the Super Nintendo side. I've seen some tools. So there was a tool where you can take the ROM and it will decompile basically the ROM, and then you play the game. And while you're playing the game, it converts all of the hex code into proper Super Nintendo assembly, and then you can compile that, right? So you can actually look and read the code and see what it's doing, and then you can make changes and you can recompile it and play the ROM again. So that's basically how I got started, right? I started decompiling the ROM using the tool. It's on the GitHub repository that is in the forums or some of the ROM hacking channels, and I just started slowly documenting what some of the things do, right?
So that decompiling process is, I'm not too familiar with going into the ROMs and looking at the code. Is this common with SNES? I mean, do you have to do this for every game? Do you have to decompress the graphics or even other code from every SNES game? Or is this just something particular to NHL 94?
No, there are a lot of games that use compression for graphics and audio. Not all of them, but just, I guess, games that had a lot of assets, they did that. They did that for it, right? So NHL 94 just happened to be one of the games that they compressed the graphics and the data for, unfortunately.
Huh. But at least now we are able to look at it and make changes, which is really good. Now, I got to ask you then, what sort of training do you have to actually do this? Because it's not something that anybody could pick up. You have to, either through formal education or through interest, just doing stuff on your own? I'm curious, like, how did you get this knowledge in order to make changes and look at the code?
I always liked programming, but I don't have like a computer science degree or anything like that. I took like some business in college that also had some programming courses. But then when I got into the real world to start working, I started working in web development, and then slowly started working in like some Microsoft technologies, coding, ASP, .NET. So I've always had a bit of a, like, even now I still code. I mainly manage, but I still code. Yeah, and really, I guess that's the background. I don't have a whole lot of coding experience. Like, it's what I do as a day job, but I'm not formally trained in it. Sort of self-taught, I guess, the best way to say it.
Yeah, that's fair. Now, in terms of, because for somebody to do this, to go through the whole effort of learning the code and exploring it and diving deep, you must have a goal in mind, right? Like, what is your goal here with looking and examining and making changes to the code?
I think, like everyone else, like, they wanted to figure out how the compression algorithm works, and maybe if we could bypass it, so we could start to introduce new graphics, expand the ROM to have more teams, update all the profile pictures, change the logos, all that kind of stuff. I think that what was originally interested me. But it's a lot of work to try and learn assembly and Super Nintendo programming. So basically, I think I just focused on understanding how the Super Nintendo worked, and how to read assembly and write assembly before I got into learning, how can I understand how the compression algorithm works, and how can we write something that will bypass the compression algorithm. I think that's still further down the road. Like right now, I just do a lot of hacks, or I'll add new code to the ROM that does new things. Like one of the hacks I did was you can pull the goalie during the game by holding the L and R trigger buttons. And so, if you have the puck, you're behind the net, you hold L and R trigger. I play the beep, and the goalie goes to the bench, and the extra attacker comes on. And you can do it to put him back in the net as well. So you don't have to hit start, pull your goal. You can do it during gameplay. That's an example of new code that I wrote, that we can, add in any of our leagues if we want to.
Now, I have to ask you, because I forget who told me this. So my apologies for the individual that mentioned it. But when I asked about pulling the goalies, somebody told me that, at least in the Genesis version, it increases the shooting accuracy of the players on the ice to 6 to 99. Does the same thing apply to SNES? Does, when you pull the goalie, what I'm trying to get at, can this be gamed in such a way before you do a one-timer, take away, pull your goalie, and as soon as you fired a shot, bring him back in? So I'm wondering if the same type of code is in the SNES version.
I can't confirm that yet on the Super Nintendo side, but I think what I've noticed is if you have your goalie pulled for a long period of time, the skills of your players start to decrease more and more and more the longer you have your goalie pulled. So, if I have the goalie pulled for like half the period, I start to notice that my guys get drilled. They start to slow down. Their shots are terrible. It's almost like it starts to penalize you the longer you have your goalie pulled, at least on the Super Nintendo side. And again, it's harder to tell on the Super Nintendo side when you immediately pull your goalie if you get a boost, because it's not the same as Genesis. Like, you can score on slap shots and a lot on Super Nintendo. It's hard to score on slappers, right? So it's hard to tell unless I dig into the code and see. I just recently started looking at the code where I can see the boosts, so I can see when the game starts, it goes through every person on the ice, and it will tell you for each attribute. It loads the attribute, and then it does some randomization. And sometimes, like at least on the Super Nintendo side, the degree that you can get boosted up is huge, right? Like, you can be usually the way it works, I think, at least I think it's similar to Genesis, is everything's 0 to 6, right? And then it converts that to a scale of 0 to 15. So sometimes I think Bob K had mentioned that Sometimes you have someone who's like a 2, which can be anywhere from 30s to 40s. I find so usually it's a range from like 38 to 41, but whenever it's a 39, and then when I watch the attributes in the code, I can see it get boosted to 15, which is the max, right? So someone that you think has crappy shooting power, a 2 shooting power, or 39 that game, all of a sudden it gets boosted to 15, and he has like 100 accuracy. So he's you give him one-timers and he's burying it in the corners.
I gotta ask, this 39 thing, is this 39 after the hot cold streak after everything, or is this 39 just their base 39? So what I'm trying to get at is, are people going to be trolling through the rosters of every team in NHL 94 to find a 39 player, like certain attributes that are 39, and just say, yeah, that's the one I'm going to?
Because sometimes if you get multiple 39 attributes, like it could be for checking or something. All of a sudden the guy's a 100 checker now, right? Or a 6 checker. Where I notice it the most stat is noticeable, is speed. So usually if someone has decent agility already, like a 3 or a 4, but they have a 39 speed, all of a sudden their speed gets boosted to 100, and they already have decent agility. So combined, it makes the player like a Solani or a McGillney, right? They're flying out there. That's where you notice it the most right now.
And this is all, I mean, if you don't have access to looking at the code real time, it's all eyeball test, right? It's all basically feel at that particular moment, right? So if you feel a player's much better in a particular skill, a particular attribute, and his ability was 39, then probably he got a boost in that, right? Is that what you're trying to say?
I think that's how it started. Like a lot of people, even guys that play Gen and come over to Super Nintendo, like from game to game, there's a large degree of difference of how the player performs. And I started to look into those attributes to see what's happening. I see the huge boost, right? So actually, I first started testing by just finding players. There's certain teams where when the guys are 2, like there's some defensemen on Ottawa where they're usually always a 39, so you can use them as testing. And all of a sudden they're flying that game, right? So that's how I started. Then I started looking into the code to see if the attributes were being boosted, and they were.
It's incredible because it's like over 30 years since this game's been released, and there's all these new features or bugs. If you want to, they're just popping up. People are discovering them now. It's making the game even more fun to play. But I got to go back. You were mentioning something when you pull the goalie, that there is skills decrease. Is this across the board for your team? Is it?
I think so. Okay. I think so. I haven't looked at those attributes. So those attributes that I said, I've been starting to learn how to watch. So in the emulator, you can pull up the debugger, and then you can say, okay, player 1, what are all the attributes and what are their current values? I'm starting to like record that and spit it out to log files. So that's something I'm going to work on next, is when you pull your goalie, I want to see if those numbers start to decrease or not, and how they decrease.
And I'd love to know what intervals, if it's a set interval, like every 15, 30 seconds, or randomized. That's first one I'd love to know. And secondly, I'd love to know if you pull the goalie and, attributes get decreased over a period of time. And if you put the goalie back in, does it reset everything to 0 again? I'd love to know the answer to those questions. Yeah. You're the man to answer those.
Yeah, I'll be looking at them. I'll be trying to figure it out.
I have to ask you something along the same vein of the code. Have you compared the code from 93 at all?
No, I haven't decompiled the 93 source code to 94. Just because I've seen lots of videos where they basically said it was almost like a full rewrite. So I don't think that there will be a lot of similarities between the code. And no one really plays 93 on Super Nintendo, so it's very time consuming, right? And there's nobody else that's really doing this other than Claire is the only other individual I know on the Super Nintendo side that's been looking at stuff. So you really got to pick what you want to, where you want to tackle. Like Chaos, I know, is doing a ton of stuff on the Genesis side. In fact, he's helped me a lot. Yeah, there's some tools that he used that he's shared with me that I can also use on the Super Nintendo side that helps us look at code, or at least view code and the change that it takes. Even the Genesis NHL Hockey, the 92 version, the source code. I look at that. I've done a few hacks on the Genesis side. I think if you look in the forums, some of the things I do on Super Nintendo, I'll port it to Genesis. I found a Genesis bug where when it pulls the goalie, on the Super Nintendo, I think it pulls the goalie if you're down by 1 or 2, or sorry, if the CPU is down by 1 or 2, it'll pull the goalie. But on the Genesis side, it only does it if it's, yeah. So, I was talking to Chaos and Smoz, and I identified where in the code it was happening on the Genesis side, and then they came up with some patches on how to get it to work for 1 and or 2 goals, or any range you want, basically.
It almost seems like it was, if the difference is greater than 1, it should have been greater than equal to 1. That's
that's exactly it. Like on the Super Nintendo side, that's where I documented it all. You can see where it does all these checks, and then it basically says, hey, if it's greater than 1 but less than 3, pull the goalie, right? And then the bug on the Genesis side, they should have just done the same thing, but they didn't.
So the reason I asked you the question with 93, because I was hoping that maybe there would be a way to incorporate one aspect of that game, and fighting. Fighting is something a lot of people, they either, I guess, love or hate, but it's another variable in the game. And so in your eyes, is there any possibility on the SNES side of fighting somehow being reintroduced into the game? Because you must have seen that documentary with Mikey, and he was talking with Mark Lesser, and they were talking about fighting. It was in one of the initial versions of the game, but through the whole duration of the programming, it was pulled out for reasons that's been talked about quite a bit. So it was there. So it's not like it's technically not possible, but is it even in the realm of possibility that we could have it put back in to the SNES version?
I don't think it was ever there in the Super Nintendo. That's my personal take. I'll have to look at some of the stuff that past that Chaos has identified on the Genesis side and see if those same paths exist in the Super Nintendo side. But from a lot of the videos I saw, like the individual who worked on the Super Nintendo side was really focused on performance, like getting it to place smoother than 93, and it gets closer to the Sega Genesis side. So, and the time frame in which he had to do this, I mean, everybody keeps throwing out there that they built it in 3 weeks. They took the source code of Genesis, and then, the Super Nintendo side, I very much doubt they built a game in 3 weeks. But I think the versions they had didn't have fighting in it, and it never even made its way into the Super Nintendo side. So to take the fighting code from 93 and put it into 94, people probably much higher than my knowledge level would have to do that. I don't think that's something I would ever be able to do.
So based on your abilities and other people's abilities, are any sort of features you want to include that's not there already?
That's a good question. I should look at my GitHub repository, because I create a bunch of some. Oh, you know what I had wanted to do? I wanted to put in the original NHL Hockey on Genesis, they had those mini logos in the scoreboard at the bottom. So if,
right,
3-2. And then when NHL PA 93 came out, they didn't have the license, the NHL license, right? They only had the players, so they got rid of the logos.
Text.
They just had the text. And then 94, they got the license back, but they never brought those mini logos back, right? So that was something I was looking at wanting to add back in, mini logos to both the Super Nintendo and the Genesis version. But in regards to functionality, I've just been working on little things like on the Super Nintendo side, there's so many posts in Super Nintendo. Everybody complains.
That I want to talk about, because in your GitHub, you talk about disable goal post bug. What is that?
Yeah. So what I did here was I eliminated when you would normally hit the post, it's going to go in the net now. So the Super Nintendo code, it's really, really tight. Like the code that checks to see if you're hitting the post only is run if it knows that you've beaten the goalie 100%, right? And then even that code, it's so tight. Like, you have a small space between where you've beaten the goalie and you're hit the post. I've changed it so when it sees that you hit the post, it's just going to drop to the normal code that it would run, which is a goal, right? So there's multiple things I could do. Right now, I just did it. I removed the side post, but I could do it where it still keeps the top post, but removes the side post, or I could randomize it and just make it randomly decide if it wants to hit that post or not when it normally would hit. But right now, I actually just removed it, right? So you get a lot more goals.
Does the community prefer that type of setup?
I just recently, so I really only started doing this stuff in December. So December, January, and February. And then I worked on creating like a little application where you can drag your ROM and you can apply whatever patches you want to the ROM, right? So I haven't really introduced any of these in a league yet. I think that's what I want to do next. Maybe I'll work with Kids Wasted. So Kids Wasted is an individual on the SNES side that runs a lot of Super Nintendo leagues.
Yeah, he's very active.
He is. He's a great guy. And maybe we can run a league where we enable a lot of these patches I've done. Like one of the other patches I did is 1 minute penalties. So they've had that forever on the Gen side. When they tried to do it on Super Nintendo, there was a bug. So as soon as you change it to 1 minute, the game would freeze. So I fixed that. And now we've started to introduce that in our SNES draft league where we have 1 minute period penalties now.
That's amazing. I'm now part of a league that has the 1 minute penalties, and it's so much more playable. As a player, like I call myself as the guy that's the most penalized player in '94. I'm happy to see that because then I'm sending guys to the box as fast as I can, but at least they're only there for a minute or less, which is not too bad. I could deal with it, but yeah. Anyway, I gotta ask you a question. The professor was just on this past week. We did an analysis on the Smythe division. Both he and Bob Kodalski did it. And one thing he talked about, the professor did, he was mentioning that in the documentation, either on the box of the SNES version of NHL 94 or on the manual, it said that defensemen hit harder or hit better than do forwards. So the question I have, I want to see if you have an answer for it. If there's two players that have the exact same everything, weight, checking, everything is the exact same, and one is a forward, one is a defenseman, does one hit better than the other, or it's the same in terms of hitting?
I haven't looked at that, and I own the manual, like I own the game in the box still, so I want to look through that because I did watch that video, but I don't recall seeing that anywhere. But it's probably possible that it's there because I know recently someone was going through the manual and they saw that you could like poke check using the goalie. And I think the majority of us didn't even know you could do that. I think you could hit the X button when you're the goalie and the goalie will try and poke check the forward, right? I'd say the majority of us didn't even know you could do that move. So I'm sure there's little things like that are in the manual that we just we didn't know. Like there is another thing in the manual that talks about hitting after the play. So you can body check after the play. And I think for the longest time, like Bob K is probably the best at that. We thought that those counted as checks, but I actually went through the code and I put like triggers on when a check counts and when it doesn't count. And once the whistle's done and you check someone, it doesn't count as a check. But that was an example of something in the manual that said, hey, checks count after the whistle, but they don't in real life. In fact, tripping counts as a check on Super Nintendo. If you trip someone, you actually see the check counter go up.
Oh, I don't know how it is in Genesis. I'm notorious for holding players rather than using poke check or anything.
Oh, are you?
Yeah, that's the way. I'm cheap. So yeah, hitting after the play. And now going back to NHL 92 or NHL hockey on a Genesis, I think that after the play, if you did that, you could instigate a fight.
Yeah,
for sure. I know you could do that, but it also influenced the crowd meter. I think that's what else it did, and I guess in 94 does that. The crowd meter does nothing, right? It's just there for fluff. Is that correct? In 94,
I haven't followed I haven't traced the crowd meter to see if it does anything on the Super Nintendo side, because it's quite possible that stuff that they had on the Genesis that they ported over, they either didn't turn off or it just was never ported. So that's probably another thing to actually look at to see if it does something on the Super Nintendo side. Because I saw those same videos.
Offensive and defensive awareness.
Yeah.
Let's go into this topic. I know Chaos did some analysis and he posted it on Discord very recently, and it was interesting stuff. We'll say that. Yeah. Have you done any analysis on the Super Nintendo and how I'd love to know how it impacts players, somebody that has a high versus a low offensive and or defensive awareness? Is that something that's, you'd look at as a favorable condition for somebody? But I mean, in terms of that, do you have any insight, any thoughts, any hints what it may be?
No insight yet. I would have to trace those attributes just to see what it's doing with them in the code. It's just another thing to add to the list. I mean, I'm assuming it's going to do, because a lot of the Super Nintendo stuff at least tries to do similar behavior as what's happening on the Genesis, right? So like all the player boosts and the randomizer code. When I look on the Super Nintendo stuff, a lot of similar code is there, just programmed differently, right? So I'm assuming the offensive awareness and defensive awareness on Super Nintendo should behave the same way as Genesis, but I haven't followed the code past to see what they do yet. I've looked at some of the checking to see, and I've found the calculations, but I still don't know in regards to, like, I know that all the Genesis weight bugs don't exist on the Super Nintendo, but at least understanding how a check works, based on weight and checking attribute, that's really one of the next things I'm looking at on the Super Nintendo side.
Has there been any analysis on how penalties are called? Like how it seems random. You hit a guy, you get penalty. You hit a guy just as hard. Next play, there's no penalty.
I was looking at the penalty shot stuff. So Kids Wasted had asked me if there was a way to turn penalty shots off. So in Super Nintendo, when you turn penalties off, penalty shots are still awarded in the game. So he wanted it. Hey, if somebody wants to turn penalties off, I also want to be able to patch the game so it won't call penalty shots as well. So I started looking at the code of how that works when you cross the line, you and the puck cross the line on its own, how that works. And I was actually able to disable it, right? So I gave him a patch where you can turn penalty shots off if you want to.
That's the same as Genesis, because Genesis, when you turn off penalties altogether, penalty shots are, you can hit a guy on a breakaway. Yeah. Now in terms, I want to like go into your personal play in terms of playing NHL 94, and because you might have an interesting viewpoint on certain things, like more interesting than somebody else that just simply plays it, because you're looking at the code. So I'm going to just use that as to, help pave the way for my question here, because the attributes for players, I'd love to know, in your eyes, what would you rank in terms of the highest to lowest? Like, which is the attribute that you think has the best impact on a player? And then you can go down the list. I'd love to hear what your ranking is for all the attributes.
I think weight is pretty high up there. I agree with a lot of the stuff that Bob K and Prof talk about. Like, weight to me is an important attribute. I like shot accuracy. Speed and agility go hand in hand. So that's an example of where I've looked at code. If you have poor agility and good speed, like when I mess with the code and make someone have poor agility but highest speed, they're still slow as molasses in the game. So they sort of go hand in hand, right? If you have decent agility and good speed, I find is a good combination. So
Randy Wood is not a very good player in your eyes.
No. Okay. Someone that has like high one and low the other, especially in statistics that are sort of tied together, like shot power and shot accuracy, I believe are tied together, right? Speed and agility are tied together. I believe weight and checking can be tied together, right? You see a lot of balancing where sometimes there's a smaller guy, but they give him good speed and decent checking, and he can drill a larger guy from behind at Super Nintendo, right? He's got so much speed and agility and checking power that he just knocks him down all the time.
Now, in terms of checking somebody in the boards. I'm looking at this through the lens of a Genesis player. So forgive me if this doesn't apply to SNES, but I want to see if it does. Sometimes when an opponent is on the boards, with or without the puck, doesn't matter, and I go to hit him, I plaster him on the boards. You get that animation where you get the stick, and it's very satisfying and everything that goes along with it. But I know that's going to happen before that animation comes. When I press the check button, I know that's going to happen. But every so often, like 1 out of 10, maybe 20, you do that, and that animation doesn't. You just basically hit him, but that player absorbs the hit, and he even bounces off the board sometimes. Have you ever seen this in Super Nintendo? And if so, what triggers a player to just not go through the whole motion of getting that two-handed cross-check into the boards?
I think it's just timing in regards to when the code gets executed, because it's always in a loop, right? It's doing this loop. So the point that you hit the button and where you are and where the code is running usually is when an animation gets missed, right? I don't see it a lot on the Super Nintendo side. Like if Bob K, you're in the corner and Bob K hits you, majority of the time you're getting knocked down, right? It's playing that animation and down you go.
Very cool. So maybe it's just me, but it throws me off because, when I'm doing that, I'm expecting to hit, I'm expecting the guy to go down. And when he doesn't, it's like, oh man, like I gotta, I have to reprogram my brain to like, okay, something else has changed and now I have to change course. But either way, I want to now go into, you've played King of 94. You mentioned it before. You mentioned it earlier in the show. What was your performance in those tournaments?
On this, well, I only play on the Super Nintendo side in King 94. So online leagues, I play both gens and Super Nintendo. On Super Nintendo, I really consider myself low level A, right? Like sometimes I'll make the playoffs, sometimes I'll upset one of the top tier guys, but low level A. I think even Halifax sent me the rankings, the King 94 rankings, and I just jumped in the top 10 on the Super Nintendo side.
Very good.
I'm sort of like at the bottom of the top of the pack, right? Genesis, I just don't play it enough. Like when I'm playing lots of games, then I'm like this league. I think I was in Gen C, and I had a good team, but I didn't do too well, right? I have to be playing a lot of games.
You're talking to the winner of the Gen G.
Oh, Gen G, nice.
It was.
Well, congrats.
Anyways,
but you got to work your way up somehow.
Yeah, for sure. But either way, I mean, going into I'm assuming based on your proximity to King of 94, you're going to be participating this year. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'll be going again for sure.
What is, in terms of like a dream placement, where would you finish in this King of 94? Like in terms of like something like that is attainable, but it would just be something that, it's maybe challenging to get, maybe very difficult, but you'd be like very happy to get to that. Like what would be that outcome?
I've done some upsets. Like I beat Mikhail, who's a champion in King of 94 in just the round robin play. So like I've beaten Anitar. I have the potential to beat some of those players. I've won like first round of the playoff portion. But then usually I lose in the second round and I got to go down to the losers bracket, right? So maybe the potential to do some damage in the losers bracket, like or make my way back up far in the losers bracket. That's probably I would assume what would be realistic for me. And what I wanted to talk to you about actually was like I watched some of these videos with Bob K and the Prof. And what I'd love to see is Dan TML used to do these videos with AJ where he sort of gave him advice on like tactical, like working the puck back to the defenseman, working it back to the forward, when you should shoot, when you shouldn't. Like I find that those top players, they're doing something different, right? That they can't articulate to us, or that we just haven't asked them well enough, right? Like, are they constantly pressing B? Like Prof said, he does a lot of tripping, right? When the guy doesn't have high weight or he's a lower weight defenseman. Bob K is constantly, body checking people. When you play a top opponent, it feels like their team is going 100 miles per hour and you're going 30, right? Like, what are they doing to enable them to get to that level? That's the kind of questions I would love some series on those top level guys, both gens and SNES. Like, what are they doing different that is enabling them to play at that, which seems to be a faster level, right? Because the line changes, like who to put on the lines, I think that's good when people are pretty even or they're first learning. But like once you want to get to that next level, it's about like style of play, how you're pressing your buttons, how you're avoiding checks, all that kind of stuff. I think there would be some neat videos on that. Would be pretty cool.
There's so much meat on the bone, and a lot of ideas I have. The problem right now, it's lack of time is number one, but this summertime is going to be challenging to do anything like that. So there is a lot I have on a drawing. I've put it on my board here of things to do, and it'll probably be executed in the winter, this coming winter. And something what you were suggesting is definitely on the list. In fact, somebody has reached out to me to talk about my gameplay and wants to work on that, and maybe we can make a video on that. And so that could be like a preliminary on that, because you know, as you progress into your NHL journey, before you get to the top tier players, if you ever get there, then you could at least analyze their gameplay and how they're doing things differently versus people below them. Yeah, that's a really good suggestion, but don't hold your breath. It's going to be a while before anything like this.
That's okay. We'll wait.
Yeah. Now, I'm going to just fire up because we're getting close to an hour, and you thought we wouldn't even get to this point, but here we are. Trust me, there's lots to talk about. I have some rapid fire questions I'd like to shoot off over to you and see if you could pot the puck in the net. So we'll start off with favorite arcade game.
For me, it's an older one. It's Championship or Super Sprint. That was my favorite. That's the one I would spend all my quarters on in the arcade.
I'm gonna go off. Did you ever play off-road like Ivan Stewart?
Super off-road, yeah. I actually have that on one of my arcades in the basement. Ivan Stewart's, yeah. Oh, so much fun. So many quarters.
All right. Going back to NHL 94. Top 5 teams in NHL 94. And this is, of course, for the SNES.
Super Nintendo? Boston. I love Boston. I love LA. New York Rangers is another team I like. I know a lot of people say Pittsburgh and Detroit. I struggle with them for some reason. You know, like I said, Boston, New York, LA. I love Calgary, and I know you had the Super Nintendo video the other week on Calgary, because it has a lot of like Joel Otto, you know, a mix of Roberts, guys that can hit, even Suter, McKennis, you know, and I love me a speed team. So like you know, Winnipeg, I like Winnipeg, I like Buffalo. I know they're lower end tiers, but those are the teams that I sort of tend to gravitate to.
So not a big fan of Mario Lemieux in a game?
I love Mario. It's the rest of the Penguins that I just like. Stevens I couldn't stand, so I put Francis in, but then Francis is slow, you know, like they can hit like crazy, but I don't know, sometimes I just struggle with them because they're a little too big, right?
Toughest opponent you've played so far?
Probably if I were to look on the forums like head to head, I think the Prof always kills me. I love playing against Token. Token is a guy that he's been off for a little while, but he's very good. Probably, I wouldn't say he's underrated. He just doesn't play a lot, but when he plays, he can beat the majority of guys. So, and of course, Bob K always dominates people.
The worst starter in a game, Scott Mellanby or anybody else that you could pick? Who's the worst starter in the game?
Scott Mellanby is pretty bad.
He is, but is there somebody worse?
I'm sure there is. I've just never really thought it from that perspective. Like, I don't know. I'd have to. You caught me off guard. I'd have to go through the list and see. Scott Mellanby is pretty bad. You're a big Scott Mellanby fan? Why were you a Florida fan?
No, I have nothing. I'm not a Florida fan or a Mellanby fan. He was, you know, a pretty good player, and nothing to, you know, he wasn't outstanding, but he was a solid player back in the day. But they did him dirty by giving him the 1 speed in the game. They just made him like virtually unplayable, which is too bad. He was a mucker, right? But anyways, what's your most memorable win in '94?
Probably beating McHale in King of '94 and just the regular round robin. I think that was considered a major upset at the time, right? I think even that King of '94, he may have almost gone undefeated. I may have only been one of his 1 losses. So that's probably my biggest win so far.
Hang that on your mantelpiece. Most devastating loss.
Oh man, probably against Anatar. I've had quite a few matches where I've been up ahead on Anatar, and he's come back and he's come back and beat me in overtime in like a 7-game series. So yeah.
Goalie ratings. Do you put any stock in that?
No. Super Nintendo?
Yes.
I think I used to. I used to like Belfour. Like I would think that like if you play deep in the net with Belfour and you stack the pads, you would make more saves than if you used a lower end goalie and you went deep into the net and stacked the pads on a breakaway. But in regards to shots and all that kind of stuff and moving and left and right and all the save animations, there doesn't seem to be much of a difference there.
NHL 95 or NHL 93? What's your preference?
On Super Nintendo?
Yeah.
95. 95
Why?
is better than 93. 93 was pretty bad. Like from a frame rate perspective, right? Like 95 at least had a lot of other features. 93 just had the fighting and poor frame rates. Like because there was nothing else before it, it was good. But as soon as you get to 95 or later, then you compare the two. Yeah, it's 95. For sure.
You ever played 94 on the PC?
I did. I'm a huge hockey fan, so I had a lot of the NHL games. So all the EA NHL games on the PC, I used to collect them. Right, so I played 94, 95, 96. I used to play online league in 96, back when it was like a phone, a dial-up modem, and they would run a league online, and you'd have to call somebody's house and play against each other.
Now, was that a 14.4, 28.8, 33.6, 56K?
33.6 back in those days.
Okay.
So that was the fastest dial-up that you could get. And it was brutal because you're like waiting 2 seconds for the guy to move and then see it on the screen. But
is it US Robotics Sportster, I'm guessing?
Yeah. I used to have V Everything and US Robotics. BBSs, those were the days.
I did that with a Commodore. So I'm dating myself, but I did that.
9600 baud modem. Yeah, no, I remember.
No, it was 1200 baud. Oh, no, this is with a Commodore. And I had a friend that had a 300 baud. So yeah. I'm this was 1200 baud was screaming fast in comparison to that.
I had that in the color computer days. It was the phone, and you had the little couplers, and you put the phone in.
I never had that. We had the one where you hook up the connector straight to the modem. It doesn't look. It looks like an RJ45, but it's smaller. It's the phone version of that. But anyways, you know what? We did over an hour. We did quite a bit, but I do have one last question for you, and I want to. You can go in depth into this. That given what you're doing, your experience with the game, if you could change one single thing with 94 to make it better. Like, I'd like to know your opinion. What would that be?
Like on the Super Nintendo side?
Yeah.
Because I played both, I would love the physics on the Genesis side, more on the Super Nintendo side. So like the fluidity of the movements on Genesis are not the same on the Super Nintendo. You could have that same movement on the Super Nintendo, like all the math that's being done to move the guys in motion and skating. If it was a little more of the Genesis side, on the Super Nintendo, I think that's what I would love to focus on, right? Or have someone make a patch for.
That's more of a feel thing, though. It's right. Like, that's just changing the way the game feels, and maybe you could even say the soul of the game that you're kind of changing in a way. But
I think it's all the math. To be honest, I think it's all the physics and the math on the two different architectures. If you could, because I know that they ported Sonic to Super Nintendo. I don't know if you've ever seen that before, but there were people that ported Genesis games to work on the Super Nintendo. And like Sonic looks and plays exactly the way it does on the Super Nintendo like it does on the Genesis. You could do something like that on NHL 94 where you can make it a little smoother. That would be cool.
Is there such a thing as just like if you have code, Genesis code, you can punch it into some sort of compiler or whatever, and the outcome is going to be playable on Super Nintendo? Does that
not that I'm aware? I know I saw a lot of videos where, like, in the later days, they would build a game for Genesis. They would build the code and basically spit out Super Nintendo version of the code and a Genesis version of the code. So it was almost identical, right? But I'm not aware of anything that's out in the real world that will actually do that. Right?
What's next for you, McMarcus? I'm curious. What's on the agenda for you?
I don't know. I would love people in the community to maybe make some suggestions. I made a suggestion a little while ago, and this is more for the Genesis side. I think something that's doable. A lot of people talk about how in 95, 96, you could do trades. There's other things you could do in the game. Well, because I'm not the best graphic artist guy, but there's people in the community that are very good at graphic work, like Indio. There's some other guys. Making a user interface where you have all the teams, you can pick a team, you could run a full 82 game season, you could do trades. So you're doing that in a user interface. And then when you go to play the game, it's going to launch the Genesis emulator and it's going to pre-modify the ROM. So it's exactly how you had it, like with the trades you made, right? So maybe your game three of 82, and in this application that I built, you can see, you're in game 3 of 82 and you're going to be playing Detroit. And then you press the play button and the ROM comes up and it has all the trades you've made and you play that game against Detroit. And then once you're done, you save state it and it shows up in the application, your win or your loss, your points, like a full season mode in a standalone application, but using the Genesis emulator and the 94 ROM. I think that's something that's like doable for sure on the Genesis side. Super Nintendo, not so much because of the compression with the graphics and stuff, but Genesis, all that stuff is figured out, right? So I think it's easy enough to do.
That'd be cool. Is this something that you would anticipate if ever somebody tackles it would be done within the next, say, 24 months?
I think if I had help with people that could do some graphic work, and like I can build applications, Windows applications, Linux applications, but if someone can do some of the graphic work, I could do all the programming that would, modify the ROM and store the stuff in a database and make it now so you can navigate and launch the emulator and all that kind of stuff. That's something that's doable in 12 to 24 months for sure.
You do have a Linux version of RetroArch, right? Because you asked me some questions. You asked me for the core, I think.
I did. I have a laptop that I install RetroArch. It's called Laka. So it's basically the Linux version of RetroArch, but it's just RetroArch. Like there's no operating system, right? So it's like super low on resources. And I ran into the same problem. If you're playing Genesis against, I don't know, a Mac user or Windows user, it would say it was uncompatible. And then I saw that you had done that, you had installed it on Linux and someone gave you a modified core. Yeah. And so when I asked for the core, I just installed it on my version of Linux. And now I play Super Nintendo and Genesis right directly from my laptop. And I have like one of those old Dell 4x3 monitors. So all the graphics look like original in the day. And I play it on there. I plug in a Super Nintendo, I think it's called RAFnet adapter. So a real Super Nintendo controller into this adapter and plugged into the laptop. Performance is great.
People are probably not going to care much about this segment of the show because, let's be honest, nobody uses Linux in comparison to Windows or Mac OS, and nobody's using it with RetroArch. But I'm one of the very, very few that does it all the time. It's my main OS. I don't have Windows. I don't have Mac OS. But one thing I find is it seems to be not very good when I host.
Oh, really?
It's better when I'm connecting to somebody. But when I host, it's not. It's laggy more so for my opponent than myself. I have to do a fresh reboot, play it, and maybe I'll get a couple of games in before I have to reboot again and do it again. And there's, it's a full operating system that I run, but I don't run very much. And I close my VPN, I close my firewall, I close everything, and then it still needs a reboot after a few attempts. It just doesn't seem to be very well optimized for Linux. But this is 1.10. 1.17, though,
You're okay.
from what limited experience I've had with it, it seems to be much better, even when I host. So I would love to do some testing, especially with 1.17, if you're available for that.
Yeah, for sure. Let me know. Do you have a spare laptop or something? Because that's another way of doing it. Like it runs perfect on this laptop. It's like it's like a 5-year-old laptop. 4 cores, 4 threads, 8 gigs of RAM, but it's just running RetroArch and NHL 94, nothing else.
Yeah, no, the only other one I have is a spare laptop. It's in use for something else. So really, I'm forced to be using this. I mean, it works. I just have to work within the limitations of it. I wish it had, didn't have those issues and it was better optimized. But either way, I'm satisfied that I'm actually able to play with it. And thanks to Blizzard for providing that help.
Shout out
for his and in fact, we'll be working on another project for some other version of another emulator, but that's a topic for another time. Anyways, we should be wrapping this up. Any last words? Anything else you just want to just rhyme up before we sign off? Because
I don't think so. Just some shout out to the guys in the community. Like I know Dan TML starting the Newbies League. I thought that was something that was interesting and good. I wish you could get some more SNES guys in to the community as well on the Gen side, but still, I think that's good work. And again, Smoz and Chaos for helping me with some of the assembly coding and all that kind of stuff, some of the tools. A lot of good guys in the community. Just wanted to give some shout outs too.
Yeah, it is a really good community and doesn't seem to have too many people that are just angry. They're just happy to be playing, and it's a good time, which is great. Anyways,
yes.
Yeah, McMarcus, thank you so much for spending the time to come on our show. And you know what? Maybe we'll have you back on, especially as there's more development in the coding side. I'd love to chat about this more in the future.
Yeah.
Whenever you want, you're more than welcome to come back on. So, yeah, with that, thank you for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this episode. And keep your stick on your ice, your controller plugged in. We'll be back at this very soon.